Hey everyone, it's Brad and Josh here, and we welcome you back, or for the first time, to We'll Bring the Popcorn, your favorite film and TV podcast. So we're just going to jump right into our reviews this week, and we're starting off with Weapons. So this was a horror film that we've been looking forward to. We've seen a lot about it with the trailers. I think if you've seen anything rated R lately, that you've seen this trailer in front of it. It stars Julia Garner as Justine, a school teacher in a small town who shows up to work one day in her entire classroom, but one kid is missing. And so the story follows that of what exactly has happened to these kids, where are they at, those who are looking for them, but also with how the teachers, the parents, the school, the other kid, the kid that was left, how they're all dealing with this disappearance because no one knows what's going on. And it definitely dives into some dark and disturbing areas as well, but it also does spend plenty of time dissecting different characters to show you how each one deals with hardships and grief and loss. Because we know Zach, the director, he lost somebody that inspired him to write this film. So you're kind of seeing probably different aspects that he's either gone through or thought about with this. And it was a really interesting film in the end. It had some dark and disturbing moments. It had some truly creepy moments as well. It had me on the edge of my seat for most of it because I was tensed up, like, okay, what's happening next? What are we going into next with this?
Yeah, and it even had some comedic elements a little bit to it in some slight ways, which I know the internet's kind of taking and kind of running with it. It was like, I didn't know this was a comedy film. It's not really a comedy film if you're paying that much attention to the film, but yeah, it deals with some really dark subjects, and hats off to the marketing team because they showed so little in the trailer that you're like, okay, we think it's going to be this way tonally, and he gives you a bunch of different types of things mixed into this. And what I appreciate about this is, this is a horror film that takes place from the various perspectives of the characters in the film, at least the main ones. And you go through about 6 or 7 different points of view all around this singular event and what's going on with it. And, I like how each character gets a little bit of time to shine, gets a little bit of nuance, has you kind of care about what's going on with each of these people. And you get everybody's perspective on, not only what's going on with them personally, but what is going on around this singular event of these kids disappearing. And, hats off to Julia Garner. I think she did a fantastic job in this, dealing with as the teacher who draws the ire of a lot of parents because they feel like this teacher may have been a witch and is responsible. Like, what are you telling these kids in your classroom? What are you doing? Which is a very real concern that a lot of parents would have in a situation
she's
like
behind
this.
it.
Yeah, like, you didn't disappear, but all these kids did. Why didn't this one kid disappear? Like, a lot of heat comes on the teacher, and she deals with, that through the use of alcohol, and, has a, just kind of spirals that way with, dealing with, not only caring about the kids, but dealing with the very real backlash of all of these parents who are coming after you, like wanting answers about their kids that you just don't have an answer for. And they do a fun job of kind of playing with, who's really responsible for these kids going and disappearing and what's the story behind it. And I gotta say, if I had one little minor knock on the film, is that it does kind of semi-go in a predictable way with, the fact that, we got to deal a little bit spoilery here just to kind of talk about the plot of the film. But obviously, one of the questions you have right out of the gate is, why is it everybody but this one kid? What does this kid have to do with the disappearance of all of these other kids, and why was this the only one that didn't do it? And they do a good job of jumping around throughout the film to kind of tease a little bit of what's coming. And you get to an end point of a direction that I wasn't exactly thinking it could have been, but I think they do a good job of keeping that bit mysterious most of the way to kind of leave you guessing as to who could potentially be involved in these kids' disappearances. And it goes a little bit predictably, but also not, if that makes sense. Like, it was a really cool way they kind of did it throughout the entire film.
Yeah, because it is a bit of a slow burn. You've got to kind of wait for all the layers and stuff to unravel and be shown and everything, because as you mentioned, it tells it from different perspectives. So you get kind of a narration that opens it up, and then we jump into Justine, because we're basically broken up in chapters where we're going to see it from her perspective up to a point, and then we jump over and we see it from another character up to a point until we get to our final character, which I'm not going to spoil that at all, but until we get to that one, and that's when it really just starts unraveling everything and you get to see everything. But yeah, it was really interesting to see, especially, like I said, it is about the kids disappearing, but it's more about the adults and how they deal with these situations. Because, yeah, you've got the parents attacking the teacher and wanting answers, and you've got Josh Brolin's character, Archer. He's the dad of one of the kids from the classroom, and he's dealing it in a way that you've seen people deal with, that he's sleeping in his son's bed, and you can tell there's tension between him and his wife. He's screwing stuff up at work. He's hounding the police every single day on information and where it goes, and he's going to other parents and trying to get information. So he's the guy who just will not let it go, because, I mean, as a dad, I can see a lot from his perspective. Yeah, my kid's missing. I'm not resting until I find something out. And you get an interesting bit from him, because he is one of the main ones who points the finger directly at Justine to say, all right, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you under arrest or something like this? Why aren't you looking at her more? Because chief of police was like, I see nothing that ties her to it. Well, you're wrong. Like, I looked in her past, she was this and that and this and that. And you get to see so many different kind of characters like that through it. Even one that I didn't expect we were going to look from his perspective, because there's a junkie that's kind of around town that plays parts in many of the stories, mostly with Paul, the police officer story. But we got a perspective from him, which was, that's where we got a little bit more of the comedy. We did almost get slapstick type of comedy at the very end, which I won't lie, it did take me out a little bit of it, because it has a very dark, serious tone. And when we get those comedic moments, again, if this is all about processing loss and grief, a lot of people turn to humor and that, and I can see that his inclusion of humor in there could be because of that, because that's some people, I deal with grief during laughter, but it did take me out a little bit, especially the more because it was like slapstick and then holy crap moment.
Yeah. It definitely got there by the end, and it definitely shifted some of it tonally once you got to like kind of the reveal as to what was causing this, and but it got very, very dark and gruesome, like very quickly in this when it got to it, and it definitely ratcheted up the intensity when it got there, because you're dealing with different thematic elements. You're dealing with, I can go ahead and feel comfortable saying, like, dealing with like voodoo and different types of, mystical type forces and all that stuff like at play here. And it gets very gruesome and very violent. Like, you have, Benedict Wong is in this movie as the principal as well. And, he does a good job of kind of being that voice of reason as much as he can until he no longer can.
He gets some of the solid, creepier stuff in this film,
he gets some very intense stuff happening when you get to his perspective of events. And it's a really well done horror movie that kind of like knows it's going to be super dark for a good chunk of it. And I think when you flip that switch to some of the comedic elements of it, I do wish they could have incorporated that a little smoother and a little better, because it does kind of just, for lack of a better term, punch you in the face when it turns it on and gets to that portion of it, that it is kind of jarring. And I don't know if that's the effect that he was necessarily going for. It may have been, I can't speak to, the director's full vision of this film, but it does kind of like, holy crap, punch you in the face when it gets to that point of it too, that I'd say the last 5 to 10 minutes of the movie gets a little absurd and almost kind of comedic at that point, while also being very gruesome. And
because you get some horrific moments and scary moments, and then you get that.
Yeah, which the last scene that you really get in that movie is just insane. And it's an intense film, man. Like, I got a lot of enjoyment out of this. I love the perspective storytelling vehicle that they used here, which wasn't what I was expecting going into this at all. I wasn't expecting it to be a multi-chapter, different perspective telling of a story like this. And I'm kind of glad it did it, because I don't think it would have worked had it been just a full linear story necessarily. I like that they came at it from different people's perspectives and slow reveals and how everything was interconnected. I think it was an effective way of telling the story that I think would have been better. That is better than what it could have been had it just been a linear type story like that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I think it was enjoyable because of that. Like, you get some retreads because of that, but you get to see it while you're looking from this angle. Well, now we're going to look from this angle, and then we're going to step past where we just looked. Yeah. So it's not that it doesn't spend that much time kind of retreading where we were, just enough to say, all right, we're caught back up. We're here. Let's move forward from a different perspective and stuff with it. And yeah, it generally had some really disturbing, creepy moments in it that had me like, I don't know if I want to look at the screen, like I want to look away. And but there was a few issues I had with it, other than there's a few story elements, which without giving away any spoilers with it is hard to talk about. But there are some things that are like foreshadowed or mentioned that actually didn't happen. So I was curious of really what that was about and what they had in there. And there was almost about, I'd say we were halfway through the movie, I wasn't sure if we were going to get a full resolution because the way it was going, it didn't, and alluding to those story points that I just talked about, I wasn't sure if we were going to get kind of a big payoff or it was going to be one where it just kind of like ends and we're left to wonder what happened, but we get basically a full conclusion to it. But it was one that I really wasn't sure we were going to get as I was going through. And there was also a few other times where some of the more graphic elements that we did get a lot of blood, and then other elements you expected to see blood, but there wasn't like anything there that was just like, well, that should be bleeding or that should be doing that. But those are little nitpicky things. Like it was a solid film overall. Like it was really well done. It was, again, it had me on the edge of my seat. It disturbed me. It creeped me out. But I could feel for the teacher because, you know, she's turning to alcohol, as you said, because she doesn't want to deal with it. The whole town is against her, but she didn't do anything. You get a little bit more about her story, that she's a teacher that cares, but she sometimes oversteps her boundaries, but not in a bad way before we start unraveling her story. And then she's like, okay, you're really stepping over your boundaries now and going too far. And then, you know, you get the kind of typical small town cop in Paul. Alden was fantastic as him, but he just had enough to show he's a cop who struggled with alcoholism and he's got a connection to Justine and he's got his own problems and other thing that he goes through. But it's still kind of the typical small town cop kind of guy that we've seen in these, you know, small town movies a lot. So like there wasn't a whole lot, but he did like great with it. Yeah, but like there were so many sequences that were just like so creepy and just like so well done. Like it's a really well shot film that gives you some great angles. Josh Brolin was great, as you said. Julia Garner was great. Benedict Wong was great, and like everyone played their parts really well, and it gave you quite a bit of instances of creepiness. But we didn't. I'll say with the kids that it was a core part to the story, but it is more about the adults than the kids themselves.
Yeah, 100%. With the exception of, you know, the one kid that makes it that we do spend a lot of time with, and you understand why they're so critical to the overall story. And that kid, man, that was probably the most disturbing part of the movie for me personally, was dealing with that kid's story and, you know, the circumstances he had to deal with. I felt myself like just feeling so terribly for this kid. Like, could you imagine like going in? I have to go more spoilery with this when you reveal that he does kind of have a direct involvement in why these kids are disappearing against his will, really. So there's, without revealing too much, but like he's having to kind of go along with something, and you just put yourself in that situation when you're like, oh my God, this poor kid is being, you know, for lack of a better term, held hostage in a situation like this. And that was probably the most disturbing part of it for me, because you have to see what happens with the kid's parents and, you know, all of the other elements that are involved in, you know, his story in particular. And I'm glad that they kind of waited till further along in the movie, probably 2/3 of the way before you really got his story and his perspective, because that was the meatiest, in my opinion, to what was going on with the actual kids. And like, man, you know, Zach Cregger did an amazing job of telling this kid's story in particular, that, you know, just how would you handle this if you were 8 years old and him being put in a situation like this and just being in absolute fear and just almost just like having your soul taken from you at that point, because like he kind of goes into this whole like, I'm being forced to do this and I'm just like completely disconnected emotionally. You can just imagine the trauma that's been inflicted on this kid. And it was dark. It was very dark. Like if once you like look at it past the surface level and just see how deep that goes and just having some empathy for that kid, and you're just like, my God, I couldn't imagine. And they just do a phenomenal job of diving into that part of it and, you know, just really feeling for that kid. And my God, man, just that part of the story really had me on the edge of my seat.
Especially like towards at the end, his sequences where things start unraveling and going, like you're fearful for him and you're worried about him and you're scared about him. And like, as a dad, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go protect that kid and keep him from everything that's going on, especially like as he's being chased. I'm not going to go too deep in the spoilers here, but you've got like the doors being busted and the heads coming through. I'm like, that kid just had to be so terrified during that sequence. Even, I wouldn't even say filming it. The kid probably was a little terrified of what it was, because it got disturbing. I do want to give some props to Amy Madigan, who was Gladys. I'm not going to go too deep into her character, but at first when she's introduced, it's kind of strange and odd and weird, and you're wondering why. But when you really started getting into her and the psychology behind her character and everything she does, it just gets deeper and darker and more messed up and crazy. And you just see the way she commanded in and out of her get up and everything was really just well done on her part.
Yeah, fantastic.
You really hated her, but you also were like, okay, what is she doing next? Like, what is this? And she's also part of that part that we both, from the way we talked, are a little bit less on the last part of her story in there. But overall, like, it was a enjoyable horror film. Like, this is not one for, I don't know, I don't want to say for the weak, but it gets into some dark and serious territories. It gets very graphic. It deals with some hard subject matter and stuff, but I think he did a fantastic job with this film. Like, it is one of the top horror films of the year for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I would put it up there with Sinners. I don't know if I'm going to rate it quite as high as Sinners, but it's definitely in that conversation for me as far as that goes. I know some people are kind of taking the kind of slapsticky nature of the last 10 to 15 minutes of the movie and kind of turning it into something that it's really not. Like, a lot of people, I've literally had two different people that went and saw me. It's like, I didn't know this film was a comedy. And my rebuttal was, it's not really a comedy.
I've seen a lot of people online saying that. It's a dark comedy more than horror. I mean, it's horror and it's got a little slapstick. But again, I feel that's his maybe perspective. Some people deal with death and horrific things in life with comedy.
I was like, did you watch Barbarian? Like, that was his other major movie. Like, it had some of those elements too, but I wouldn't consider Barbarian a comedy, like, by any stretch. And that's kind of the style that he has in his films. But yeah, man, like this had so many good, dark, twisted elements in this that like forces you to pay attention. And if you're willing to lose yourself emotionally in a story like this, it'll take you on a journey. Like, I really went on a full like emotional type journey where I was shocked and sickened a little bit and just horrified. And yeah, I laughed a little bit at some of the goofiness of the end of the film, but it didn't take away from the overall emotional punch that this movie was for me. And he just does such a good job of interweaving all of that. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of this too, for sure.
Yeah, so in the end, Weapons was a really solid horror film. It gets into the dark and disturbing. It tells its story in it's a way that we've seen before, but it does really well of breaking up into chapters to let us kind of sit and breathe with these characters for a while before we jump ahead to another character and we see everything in one. It's got a few issues. I've got a few issues with some of the plot points and things that it did, and a little bit with the slapstick. Like, it doesn't fully take away, but it does, like, okay, I just wasn't expecting that. But I'm giving this a solid 8.5. Like, I was kind of torn between 8.5 and a 9 because I did really enjoy it. I think he did a fantastic job, but those things that I'm kind of nitpicking on is going to have it sitting in the 8.5 for me.
Yeah, I'm giving it a solid 8.5 as well. That's exactly where I landed. And It's not a perfect movie. It's not perfect by any means, but it's still a really, really good, dark, twisted, sickening kind of horror film that if you allow yourself to lose yourself emotionally in it, I would agree. Like it goes dark. It punches you in the gut. If you have, a strong empathy for especially kids, man, especially with, Alex's story, like he was such a central figure once you got to the back half of the movie and dealing with his story. Like you really feel it then. And they do a good enough job of having you connect with each of these characters because it gives you time to kind of put yourself in their situations and kind of understand what they're going through and what happens to them. And it did a really good job of allowing these stories to semi-overlap while also pushing the narrative forward. So it's not retelling the exact same thing. It's like taking it and it's like, okay, this is where these two characters tie together. Now we're going to move it a little bit forward. And I really appreciated that style of storytelling. So for that, I'm giving it an 8.5. It's not without some little minor issues, but it didn't nitpick and take away my enjoyment out of this film at all. An absolutely fantastic horror film that I will watch again.
Yeah, so Weapons is in theaters now. Go check it out. It's well worth seeing in theaters for the creepiness, the effect, because I think I could feel the tension in the room with a lot of the stuff too. So if you go check it out, come to our socials, come to our Discord, come talk to us about it. We'd love to discuss this more because there's a lot of different layers and Easter eggs and like other things that almost when I rewatch it again, when it's on digital, that I want to really see if there's little hints of things or things that I just didn't catch, because there are some different layers that are kind of spread out throughout. But it was a very enjoyable horror movie and one of the best of the year.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely going to have it high on my list for a while. It's going into my, Halloween horror movie rotation for sure. It was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to dive back into it and check it out again for sure. It's always going to get a high, it's going to get a higher rating from me if I want to see it again and see it multiple times. This is absolutely one, and I'm going to want to go back and revisit again for sure.
And it's been on my brain because it was announced that Pedro Pascal was originally attached to this movie. And I'm trying to figure out, like, where would he really have fit? Because Zach said he had to basically recast the entire film after Pedro had to drop out, because I think it was for Fantastic Four, the 300 other projects he has going on. Like, was he going to be the dad?
I think so.
Was he going to be the principal? But this is one where it's kind of good that Pedro dropped out. I enjoy him as an actor and everything, but I think Josh and Benedict Wong, they did such a good job with those two characters. So that seemed like the main two that he potentially was going to be, unless maybe he was the cop as well. Like, there's really like 3 or 4 guys that he could have been in this film, but it kind of worked out well. Maybe not for him, but for the film, that they got the cast they did because that happened.
Yeah, I have a feeling if he was going to be anybody, if he was going to play that important of a role that you have to recast, I have a feeling it would have been Archer. It would have been, Matt's dad, played by Josh Brolin, who did a phenomenal job in this film. But since he was that crucial, because Josh Brolin does do a lot of heavy lifting throughout a good chunk of this film, I have a feeling if he was that important, it would have been him. But I could be wrong. But
or Pedro was going to be Gladys.
That would have been insane. Holy crap.
I think he would have really owned that if he did it. It would have been hysterical if he did it, but yeah.
That would have been crazy too. But yeah, what could have been, and it's another one of those what if castings, right? Like, what if he had been in it? How different would the movie have been? I don't know, but we got some phenomenal performances out of this for sure. To find all of the episodes of We'll Bring the Popcorn, go to our YouTube page, hit the like and subscription button so you're getting our episodes when they drop each and every Monday. If you're listening to us in the audio room on any of the podcasting platforms that we're on, please don't forget to give us a 5-star review. It really helps elevate the profile of the show. And don't forget to go to willbringthepopcorn.com, where it has all of our archive videos, all of our social media information, as well as our merch store, so you continue to support the show in that way. We cannot thank you enough for your continued support.